Welcome to the program Restoring My African Soul. My name is Janet Murphy Robertson, and I'm Executive Director of artistsandmusicians.org. I'm delighted to be here today with Robin Joyce Miller. Robin is an artist, a teacher, a friend, and a personality extraordinaire. Welcome, Robin.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Janet. I enjoy talking to you. We've done that on occasion. It's special to be here to discuss restoring my African soul and my feelings about growing up and being Black.
Fabulous. Robin, you speak very frankly about an important topic in America, the topic of race. I've heard you speak very, very frankly on the subject. And I think many people will be very interested to hear you speak and hear you tell the story of your own life and how you came progressively to more authentic artistic expression by connecting with your family and your culture and your history. So perhaps we could begin at the beginning. Can we talk a little bit about your childhood?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I grew up in Queens. I had a mom and a dad and a brother, and I was the oldest. I was born in 1955 during the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. My father was an artist, and so I had art in my home. I was used to having art. My father did African American pieces. He wasn't really a painter. We did have paintings in my house. However, my father was a graphic illustrator, a technical illustrator, and
Parsons School of Design?
Parsons School of Design.
Oh,
he was one of the only African Americans in his class. He only went there for like 2 years. Mm-hmm. And he made a career as an artist after 2 years of that. So we're very proud, we were always proud of that. My father was the only artist that I knew. As a young person, I never knew that I had it in me to be an artist. I didn't understand the concept of DNA, that it could be passed on. I looked at my father's hands and I remember just thinking they were magical. And my art was uninspired as a child.
And how did your family feel about your becoming an artist?
That's interesting. My mother was excited. My father didn't know if he needed another artist in the family, okay? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Quite frankly, he was very happy with me being a teacher, not necessarily going into his turf. So he did have some, there were some issues. Before he passed, he totally accepted me as an artist as I continued, and he saw that it wasn't going to go away. But I think that he was very happy for a while being the only artist in the family.
Interesting. Now, in your household, there were images of African people, and how did you feel about that?
Honestly, I didn't think about it. Mm-hmm. This was just my home. Mm-hmm. Later on, I would say the images on television were the ones that had an effect on me. I grew up watching the Civil Rights Movement. I saw children being hosed down. I saw cartoons with African people on it, screaming and wearing costumes that I felt offensive. The characters on TV, Mammy, when I saw Gone with the Wind, these type of Amos and Andy characters, I found insulting. I just didn't feel proud. They didn't evoke a feeling of pride in me. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I knew that I wasn't so proud then. It was just an uncomfortable feeling of why am I part of a group that is so disrespected in the country, in the world, on television.
Yes, and your cousin, you told me once about your cousin, Ozzy.
Yes.
And tell me about him and how your awakening on the
I was
subject.
5 years old and he was 18 years old. And he came to live with my grandparents for a while. So he was fun, and I played with him, and he was always playing 45s, listening to Smokey Robinson. And I remember one day he decided to tell me that my family came from African people. He goes, that long time ago, our family, they were Africans. And I was highly offended. I said, I'm not African. I'm not African. I couldn't imagine how terrible. To me, that was horrible. And I just ran around screaming. And I remember him telling me, yes, we are. Yes, we are. And I was offended and could not imagine him saying that, although there was something in me that said, okay, we're brown people, they're brown people. You know, so this is, I'm just telling you now as an adult. As a child, I just felt uncomfortable, even angry that he would say this. And I have a poem, okay? I have a poem that I wrote, you know, as an adult, thinking about what I might be feeling. And that poem is Ignorance is Not Bliss. Don't want to be no African. No, Lord, not me. Dark, shiny skin, just plain ugly. Don't want to be no African. Why would I be? I don't run through the jungles or swing on some tree. Don't want to be no African. No, Lord, not me. Too much shame, too much pain, no proud history. Can't be no African. Who would I be? Not a person, but something enslaved shamefully. No, Lord, don't want to be no African. So when I read that, even say that now, I'm not proud of that feeling. It's a feeling that says, you know, when Malcolm X came along, he started talking about, I'm black and I'm proud. And that was an important time, an important movement, because I don't think that I was the only one that felt that. And knowing black people and knowing the conversations I had with friends, we discussed, there were times who was lighter, who had straighter hair, whose lips were bigger, who had more Eurocentric features. So those kind of things said that we're not really proud of who we are. We're trying to be something else.
So, Robin, is it fair to say that this was really a crucial part of your evolution as a person, as an artist, to grapple with all of that and ultimately to embrace your culture? We'll be talking about the amazing works that you've done where you ultimately talk in a very powerful way about the black experience. But at a young age, you had absorbed something from the culture that was not positive.
A lot of negativity. I remember watching the civil rights movement, I saw people like Bull O'Connor, and I saw signs that said that they don't want to be with black people, white people not wanting to be with black people, as if we were dirty or something was wrong with us. We were second class, even third class citizens. So it took a while, and I didn't realize the impact. But I do want to say this. I didn't know my roots. And certainly someone like Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X, they addressed that. Marcus Garvey stated, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Malcolm X phrased it a bit differently, but the concept is just the same. Just as a tree without roots is dead, a people without history or cultural roots also becomes a dead people. So I feel that my lack of understanding, knowledge, history, a sense of my roots, and that we did come from people who were amazing, African proud people. So I didn't understand that concept, and that belittles you. It makes you feel less. It makes you feel smaller. I don't even like the word minority. Being a minority to me sounds like I'm less than, not just in quantitative kinds of means, but qualitative. When you hear, oh, you're a minority group, it just sounds like it means you're less than other people. Mm-hmm. And so all those yes. terms,
language
yes. barriers, it all impacts people, even if they don't realize it. You know, you're a minority. So I never liked the term minority.
And perhaps these words enter into the consciousness of young people as they're growing up.
Absolutely.
Certain images.
Even the word Negro. The word Negro was so close to the other N word that I felt there was some offensiveness in it. I liked black better. I especially embraced African American because it tells more about the culture and where you're from. Nobody is really white. No one is really black. So, you know, I think African American is giving a sense of, oh, you have a background from Africa. It tells you that you come from a people, not just your color.
Now, Robin, inspirational figures in your life. You mentioned Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, but I believe Martin Luther King was even more, in many ways, an inspiration to you.
Absolutely. I embraced the nonviolence. I embraced the bringing people together, the integration of people. When I started working at my school, I was at PS 108 in the Bronx. I was actually at first the only black teacher in the school. And as time went on, the school became more integrated. It was first a school of, I would say, Italian neighborhood, Italians, Jews, a Puerto Rican group, and a few African Americans. When I retired from the school, the whole world was there, which was amazing. And so you had children from every Asian group, Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese, just name a group. They were from Thailand, children from Pakistan, from India, children from Yemen, children from Africa, so speaking French, children from, I had someone from Sweden once. You had children from Albania and Russia, children from South America. So it was an amazing school that was a microcosm of the world. And I felt that Dr. King's dream was, I could see it there, I could feel it there. And so I came up with these scribble kids. The scribble children were my cartoon characters, and they were inspired by an incident. Well, actually, they were inspired by looking at children in general, looking at my husband and looking at my son, and looking at other people. But the concept was inspired by people wanting to come together. An incident happened, that's it, an incident in Brooklyn, where a Korean grocer got into an argument with one of the black customers. And it turned into a race riot that was on television, created lots of problems. David Dinkins, the first African-American mayor of New York City, spoke out, and he said to teachers in particular, do something that will promote peace and racial harmony. So at that time, I took my scribble kids, who were multicultural children, and I decided to put them in a work of art. And when I did, I put them in this work of art. They're all standing together, and I wrote a poem that goes with that. And that poem is this: when you see this picture, please open up your mind. Don't pick out certain children. Don't choose your favorite kind, but look at us and see we're standing strong and tall. Look inside our hearts. There's beauty in us all. We come from different places, from different backgrounds too. But here we are together with one strong point of view. We're here to make things better. We're here to make you see. We can't exist on things like hate. We all need harmony. We may not know our history and how things got this way. We only know tomorrow's gone if we don't change today. We say we share a common flag of red and white and blue. Why can't our multicolors then stand for something too? So look at us and marvel at what the world could be if we strive for peace on earth and racial harmony.
Profound and fabulous. Thank you for that, Robin. So you have not only the artistic genes that come from your father, you also are very much the poet.
Well, my grandmother loved to do poetry in church. She loved Langston Hughes. My father liked to perform, so it's in my brother. He likes to perform. So I guess it's in the DNA.
Yeah, very exciting. Now, this campaign, the Scribble Kids, got some recognition, fabulous recognition, didn't it?
Yes, it did. When I did the first piece of art, I gave to the mayor, but I also created a poster. The poster I sent out to an African-American advertising agency, and at the time, they wanted to do a Pepsi ad honoring Dr. Martin Luther King. So when they saw my ad, they saw my poster and my children, they said, this is the dream that Dr. King is talking about. So they commissioned me to do an ad honoring Dr. King. And my scribble kids are there, and one child's writing on the board about using Dr. King's quote about my 4 little children being judged by the content of their character.
Fabulous. And do the Scribble Kids live on in any way?
The Scribble Kids
do you
were
revisit them, or?
I do revisit them. Let's see. Well, the Scribble Kids have done lots of things. So I haven't really done so many books. I have books in the works. There's a book that I want to come out with honoring the Scribble Kids honor Dr. Martin Luther King. And I already have done a slideshow presentation for that. So I really want to use them in that way. I also did a book called Back to School, and that has funny little children's poems about events happening in school. So they're my little ambassadors for peace. When I was a teacher, the children used to at times say that for graduation, do that poem. So yeah, it lives on and it will continue.
Fabulous. Now, another part of your evolution has had to do, I believe, with the bit of fashion, music. You've had some inspiration from Lena Horne. You've had some identification with figures of that sort. And then, more importantly, I think the Harlem Renaissance, becoming immersed in that whole important period as a source for your pride in your amazing culture.
Absolutely. One of the things that I did when I took a sabbatical, I stayed home and studied. But that was an amazing period of time, because that's when that's when the art that I do now began. But what I started to do was I really became in touch with the Harlem Renaissance. I knew about the characters in the Harlem Renaissance, but I have to say, in college, I never took a course that addressed it. In elementary school and high school, never did I hear about the Harlem Renaissance. I made it a point when I became, as a teacher, an art teacher, that would be a part of my curriculum. So when I also, during that time, I read jazz, and I did a series of Harlem Renaissance pieces. In fact, there's one behind us. This is called Take the A Train. I wrote a jazz poem, Jazz in the Art class. Jazz was exciting because, not that I love jazz, I like jazz, I really do. But some people now think, oh, you just love jazz. Well, I love the concept that we can claim it as African Americans. That's something that belongs to us as a people. We created it. So, and the fact that I can say we created it, no, I'm not a jazz musician, but it's a good feeling when your culture, you're part of a culture that's doing things that make you feel good.
Yeah. Well, going back a little bit to that point when you did not yet have this enthusiasm and appreciation for your culture. Now, a friend of yours visited your home, and can you tell me that story?
Yes, my awakening.
Yes.
I was a person who, I have friends who laugh about this. As a teenager, I watched All My Children. And I loved Phoebe Tyler Wallingford's home. She was a prominent woman in the town of Pine Valley. And I loved her furniture. I loved her lamps. She had these gorgeous lamps, and they were Asian lamps. And when I decorated my home, shortly after my husband and I got married, I laid down I went out to Bloomingdale's and I bought an Oriental rug that I was quite proud of. I bought my Oriental lamps that looked like the ones that were in Phoebe's living room, and I called them my Phoebe Wallingfords. I had a piano, because I did play the piano, and it just so happened that it was a Kauai, but the art that I put in was Asian art. So this friend, I'm very proud of my house, and I had my slipper chairs, and I know this friend came over and she said, wow, Robin, she took one glance at my house and said, if I didn't know you lived here, I wouldn't know that a black person lived in this house. And that was an aha moment. I could have taken it as a positive and said, yeah, because my taste is so good or whatever. I was taken aback. And it said, wow, I cannot be found in my own home. What's going on in my head that I don't feel that a beautiful home would have African pieces, that would have African American pieces? So when I started when I took my sabbatical and started, the first pieces of work I did were African sculptures. My father gave me a book on African sculpture, and I started doing printmaking. So my first pieces were designed based on African sculpture. I started hanging these pieces in my home. Then I started doing Harlem Renaissance pieces and hanging them in those kinds of pieces in my home. What I realized was I started to become prouder of who I am. And when I did the Middle Passage, I would look at my Middle Passage piece that showed the slaves on the ship. And I said, I would come home from work and say, wow, my worst day is better than their best day. So therefore, I can be proud. And in fact, I have a poem, a Middle Passage poem that I would like to do. Let me just find that. Middle Passage Cargo. Let's see.
Now, the Middle Passage work, the artwork, and also your work on the Harlem Renaissance and a number of your other pieces
Yes.
are in the Zion Union Heritage Museum in Hyannis. Where you are artist in residence.
Yes, I am so proud to be a part of the Zion Museum. They have embraced both my husband and I. We are both volunteers there. This book that I'm about to read from, Rhythms of a Faithful Journey, my husband and I published it together last year. He did poetry, I did poetry. We went to Africa, to Ghana. We were on the slave, one of the slave castles. We went to 2 slave castles, Elmina Castle and Cape Coast Castle, but we renewed our vows of 30 years on Elmina Castle. That experience really brought us to our roots. And I wrote this piece, Middle Passage Cargo, which I want to share because I thought about the people, I thought about my lack of pride that I had, and I wrote this. Knowing your struggle, feeling your pain, knowing from whence you came, gives me faith in God up above, gives me truths I can claim. Knowing they try to peel off your pride with hatred, with bondage insane. But watching you rise above malice and lies gives me strength to walk proud without shame. Knowing your faith and your fortitude, knowing that I come from you, gives me great courage, and I understand there's nothing that I cannot do. So what this work was doing for me, it was restoring my African soul. In fact, at first I thought the word renewing or soothing my soul. But I was in church because I do go to my church, St. Albans Congregational Church in Queens, and my minister was doing a sermon on the restoration of your soul and the 23rd Psalm and how God restores your soul. And so I was sitting there and I thought, no, not when he started talking about how we suffer and our souls suffer and how God restores our suffering and our souls. I thought about soothing my African soul. No, restoring my African soul. And I realized that my art and my poetry was doing just that. It was bringing me to a new sense of pride as I felt a sense of restoration.
A beautiful term, very evocative, and it reminds us that there was something there that needed to be restored.
Absolutely.
And maybe perhaps on a personal level and also more broadly in the culture, because
Yes.
your experience is a very powerful one, but it's not unique. Many other people of color go through similar journeys to yours in terms of reconnecting with their cultural roots, and it's fascinating to hear. I was thinking also of a spiritual that at one point was very inspirational to you. I've been buked and I've been scorned.
Yes, well, I like to listen to, when I do my art, I call on my ancestors. It's a way of thinking and saying, first of all, my art is about saying to my ancestors, I'm sorry that I was ashamed of you. I'm proud of you. And when I listen to, I have a CD, Revelations, Alvin Ailey's Revelations, and I was listening to that. And when I was thinking about the Great Migration and why African Americans left the South in thousands, possibly even millions, but certainly thousands to leave and go to the big cities, Detroit, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago. Why did they leave? And I was inspired also by Jacob Lawrence's book, The Great Migration. So I wrote my poem, The Great Migration, being careful not to step on his toes or move into his area, but it helped me to think about some of the reasons we left. My poem goes like this. The name of it is Heading North. Been so beaut, been so scorned, heading north, sure as I was born. Ain't no jobs, ain't nothing fair. Boll weevils, floods everywhere. Want no part, no Jim, no Crow. Can't pick no cotton, not no more. Seen some folks a hanging, got me looking in the skies. Where you at, Lord Jesus? Can't you hear our mournful cries? Got to get me a ticket, got to get us on a train, get my family to somewhere that be sane. Been so beaut, been so scorned, heading north, sure as I was born.
Amazing. And that the inspiration is a spiritual. That's
The inspiration is a spiritual. The inspiration is also my grandmother. My grandmother liked Paul Laurence Dunbar, and he spoke in dialect. And so when I do that, I hear my grandmother, I hear her voice, speaking. So that comes back to me also. My grandmother's from South Carolina, and so she still said, she still had a bit of an accent. Yes.
And church, you returned to church, your childhood church at a point in time. Was that important to you, the connection with your religion, with God?
Absolutely. Let me say that when I took my sabbatical in 1997, the school year 1997, 1998, that was a pivotal time in my life. I didn't know what I was doing, and I remember telling my principal, I'm going to do this on my sabbatical. And she said, Robin, you're making me tired. Your sabbatical is a time for rest. And I started to realize I didn't know where I was going. And so I said this out loud. I said, Dear God, wherever you lead me, I will follow. And my life changed immeasurably. And one of the first things, that was when this art came along. That's when my son got into a special school that he needed to get into. And that is when God led me right back to church. So I found that the more I walk in those steps in my faith, the better my life is, the more positive it is. So that is a very important part. Even that's why rhythms of a faithful journey. As a people, we have been a faithful people. We've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, trusting in His holy word or holy name. He never failed us yet. So these are things that I grew up hearing. And my father was the assistant superintendent of the Sunday school. My father then became a deacon. I was in Sunday school every Sunday. So I did leave church for quite a while. But when I made that statement, Dear God, wherever you lead me, I will follow, somehow I guess he felt, well, you need to start in the church. So I brought my whole family back to church. There's a piece I did called The Restoration. And that piece is, something that is important to me. And it talks about that period.
And your journey also led to the classroom. You taught special ed.
Yes, I taught special ed. I wouldn't say initially that I wanted to teach special ed. That is where the jobs were. And it wasn't because of the special ed children. I love teaching the children. And I did 15 years teaching special ed. But later I realized my heart and my love is in art. So I didn't really want to be in the classroom. I'm just passionate about art. And so after that sabbatical where I studied art and went back to school and took classes and became certified as an art teacher, when I returned, I was an art teacher. So the next 14 years of my career I spent as an art teacher and loving every minute of it.
You mentioned your journey to Africa, and actually you had 2 trips, I believe, to Africa. And how have some of the images, like the Sankofa, entered into your art or inspired you?
Well, first of all, at least 2 pieces that I have in my book, Rhythms of a Faithful Journey, were directly inspired by that trip. Journey to Hell. That piece shows slaves walking to the slave castles and then the slave ship waiting. On that trip, we found out that the slaves walked sometimes 3 to 4 months in chains to get to the coast. So that was a surprise. I just didn't, I kind of pictured before that everything beginning with the Middle Passage, not thinking about what happened before, not thinking so much about the slave ships. And the other piece, the Slave Castle quilt, shows images from Elmina Castle. The magazine, which is the ammunition, the dark, dank kinds of things. And my husband, he really wrote a poem called The Door of No Return. So he will do that for you.
Excellent.
And in 2012, my husband, James Walter Miller, and I retired. At that time, I decided to take my collection of African American history quilts and turn it into a book. I write poetry and he writes poetry. So I asked him to join me in this venture, and he said, sure, I'll write some poems. So I gave him a collection of quilts, and he took those quilts, studied them, got some information, and started to write poetry. We visited slave castle, they called slave castles, Elmina Castle and Cape Coast Castle. However, they're dungeons where the slaves were kept before they put them on the ships to send them out. So it was a harrowing experience. The group, we went with our church, and during that time, we both wrote poetry about the experience. He's now going to share The Door of No Return, which is the door that they left to go to the ships. And when he saw that, he was deeply moved, and this is the poem that he wrote, Door of No Return.
Am I really here this morning, hearing drum songs for the very last time? My identity and family are stolen. In chains, I leave this country of mine. A slave object, no longer a person, sold at auction and no longer free. The sailors and the ships are arriving. My Lord, what will become my destiny?
Now we're going to change things up a bit from that to going to the Harlem Renaissance. We're going to move to Harlem where things were swinging and life was just much better for African Americans. The new Negroes had moved up from the South and they were living a different life. And so he's going to do his piece called Renaissance.
1920s Harlem created a flame the world would see. 1920s Harlem changed the fabric of American history. It had its own intelligence, it had its own rules and rights, it had its own expression, it had its own electric nights, it had its own community, it had its own power, it had its own police, its own food 24 hours. It had its own swagger, it had its own beat, it had its own entertainment, it had its own musical street. It had its own rhythm, it had its own style, it had its own culture, it had its own style. Harlem. 1920s Harlem created a flame the world would see. 1920s Harlem changed the fabric of American history.
You know, in restoration, I wanted to say that there was a special day. to come to restoration. This work and this body of work that I've done, I want you at some point to look at the books and images, educating myself and others on the history of the African American journey, then creating art, poetry, and books have brought about a new attitude. The body of work that I've done says to my ancestors, I love you. How could I ever have been so painfully ashamed of you? You walked through the fire so that your descendants could proudly claim the inheritance you earned for us. Therefore, you will never hear this Robin Joyce Miller today cry, don't want to be no African. And I want to say that there was this day, and it was like a month or so after my sabbatical, and I'm not my sabbatical, my retirement, and I was taking my 4.5, maybe 5 mile walk, and I just felt in a state of peace. It was like a baptism and a renewal, and I looked down at my arms, and I held them out, and I felt the rays of the sun browning my limbs even more than they were before I left my home. And I gazed up in the sky and thought, I love my warm brown skin, caressed by God's spirit-filled sun, created to live in harmony with His earth. With His earth, I am one. And I smiled to myself and I thought, yes, God has surely restored your African soul.
Fabulous. Now, what about the future for you?
The future. Well, it's important to me to continue to be an educator, to go to schools, to talk to children, to talk to adults. When you and I met and talked at the Jacob Sears Library, there were many people who just didn't understand the experience. Not only have I shared the experience there, but it's interesting, we are part of the West Parish Barnstable Church. I'm congregational. My church, St. Albans Congregational Church, is an all African American church. However, when we came here, 3 minutes from our home was the West Parish Barnstable Church, which is the oldest congregational church in the country. So God just planted us there. We went to that church. We were embraced in particular by the oldest woman in the church who took my arm and embraced me outside the church. And they've actually asked me to speak. I spoke in the pulpit, something I never imagined in my life. And the sermon, or they called it a sermon, I call it a message. But the message that I delivered was called Look to the Lord. And I talked about racism and the civil rights movement. And they were touched. So I see that it's important to still go out and have the conversation. These are turbulent times. We're coming back. We've got Ferguson. We've got things happening where people, they elected an African-American president, but many people now are feeling that they wonder why. And there's an anger that you can feel. He's having such a difficult time. And so any time an African-American has been the first at something, they've been faced with adversity and difficulty. And that's what I see for this president. My heart goes out to him.
And young people, young Black people, how important is it for them to understand their history and to have the journey to reconnect with their family history, their entire culture, and to have that kind of powerful reconnection that you've had? Is that something that young people...
Absolutely. That is why I was feeling ashamed, because I did not have that history. I didn't know. I have to say, one day my son came home with his cousin and a friend. And the friend looked around my home and saw the African-American pieces, the Harlem Renaissance, and he said, wow, you make Black people look beautiful. And I said, Black people are beautiful. And he goes, but people need to see this. So we need to see who we are, who we have been, and who we can be in the future. We need to know that we are special. We need to know our roots. That's what Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X were talking about. They hear about Martin Luther King because of the holiday and in schools, but there are numerous people that I haven't spoken about, that they need to learn about, that they need to know. And not only African American young people, but all people need to know. African American history is part of American history. It's not separate. It is integrated into the history. It is part of the history. African Americans helped build this country. So it's not a separate entity to itself. And I'm often offended by the fact that even with my work, people are just most interested in February, when this is history for everyone at all times. It is not just something that should be secluded to the month of February and maybe January because of Martin Luther King.
And a wonderful place for people to follow up and see your work and learn more about the total story would be the
Zion. Absolutely,
Union
Zion.
Heritage Museum.
I hope to do some workshops there for teachers, and hopefully young people will come, and then I would like to go out to the schools and speak. I have slideshow presentations on the Harlem Renaissance, on jazz, which integrates European, American artists who are both white and black, just many, peace and harmony, just trying to bring about a cohesiveness of people and cultures, because America now is made up of the world. We are the world. So it's important that we all feel good about who we are, and we understand that we all have something to contribute to society.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robin Joyce Miller. And thank you all for joining me for this conversation with Robin. And we will be seeing
It's a pleasure.
you again.
Absolutely a pleasure.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robin.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Janet.